But I want to start saying this sincerely. I am going to apologize to the big man. And there was definitely some dude on Twitter that I clowned. The Bieniemy stuff is real. Now, whether or not he ends up here, Mitch brought it up. I said no. I still don't think it's the right move, right hire, any of it. I don't know that it'd be the right move for Bieniemy, but I checked. Rappaport had the tweet over the weekend, I believe. I think I even said last week that I've started to hear that this is like there's some truth to this, at least the exploration. So I'm sorry, big man. You brought it up. I said no. And I still don't think it's the right move necessarily, but apparently it's a real option.
The more that it gains a little legs, I kind of think he might be a good move for this organization. And, honestly, anyone coming from the Andy Reid offensive coaching tree, I'd be interested in, just like anyone from the Sean McVay coaching tree, if it ends up being Thomas Brown as well. But I like these guys who are coming from kind of, innovative offensive minds. And that's not to take anything away from a guy like Charles London or, some of the other folks that have come through. But, whatever the knock on Bieniemy is, the reason that he didn't get the head coaching jobs along the way, whatever it may be, he's been sitting between a incredible offensive minded head coach and an unbelievable quarterback. And there's no doubt that he's picked up a lot of good knowledge over the years with him, and I'd be interested to see what he can do outside of the whole Andy Reid thing. And I think for Bieniemy, it's a relatively safe space for him to come here. He has a little bit of a relationship with Ron. They are on the staff together in Philly at the same time. I read somewhere he was Marty Herney was the one that drafted him in San Diego back when Bieniemy was coming out of college as a running back. So, he's got some familiar faces around here, and it'd be kind of a good space for him to come. Color me intrigued. I think my two favorite right now are Bieniemy and Thomas Brown.
Very, very classy move of you, JP, to capitulate there. And I don't think I necessarily came out against Mitch when he said Bieniemy originally, but I certainly was skeptical of it. So, Mitch, here's a slight hat tip to you as well. For me, my requirements with this job, as the search has become extended, are pretty simple. Is the person an outside guy, and does he have a track record of success? Like Pat Shurmur's an outside guy, but I don't know how great his track record is. Bieniemy satisfies both checklist points. Now you can wonder how much of this success is really his, how much of it is Reid's, how much of it is just being blessed with Mahomes and Kelsey and Hill. And those are all valid questions, but I'd rather have him come to DC and try and prove the doubters wrong than bring in Shurmur or hire Zampese. I think he is at the top of my list alongside Thomas Brown. And I think this is promising. Now, I don't really think he'll actually come here. And I'm also a little skeptical that this is just Ron floating to Rappaport. Hey, we have no idea what's going on. We're not getting any bites. Can you just put out there that we're interviewing Bieniemy? All the fans love that guy. They're all going to think I'm so smart. And then when he says no, I can at least say we tried. That's sort of my feel right now. But still, let's see if he takes the interview. Let's see if the interview happens and maybe he becomes a real candidate. And if he somehow ends up taking the job, I'll be pretty pleased.
Yeah, I think I agree with both of you guys. I think he's got to be at the top of the list, right? Like, look at where he's been and how good they are. And maybe he's a small part of that. Maybe he's a massive part of that. But, like, guys like Nathaniel Hackett and Adam Gase get head coaching jobs because they're along for the ride with Aaron Rodgers and Peyton Manning. Like, hell yeah, you'd want Bieniemy as your OC. Who knows what it'll result in, but hell yeah, you'd want him. I don't – to Pete's point about whether he'll take it or whether he'll even take the interview is kind of interesting. Like, I fear shades of we tried for Matt Stafford, we couldn't get him, so we got Ryan Fitzpatrick. We tried for Russell Wilson, he wouldn't come here, so we got Carson Wentz. Like, hey, we tried for Eric Bieniemy, he wouldn't come here. Here's Pat Shurmur. But I think he should be at the top of the list, right? I mean, just based on the track record of accomplishment, and for all the rumors of like he doesn't interview well, like who cares, dude? Like, I'll probably interview him. I don't care if it goes bad if they win 11 games. Like, we'll talk to him at the podium. I don't care if that's bad, if Sam Howell develops. So I don't care about the interviewing stuff. I can't imagine dumb/criminal stuff that happened 30 years ago is still derailing his career, but maybe that stuff combined with the Commanders is a tough situation. I don't know enough about whatever those allegations are. I don't know. I just, if I'm Bieniemy and the Ravens are an option, and it's now come out that the Ravens are going to tag Lamar, like the Ravens are so far and away the top option. Like, I mean, by a country mile. And you still got the Titans, and if you want to run the ball, and you got Derrick Henry. My thing is the reason I say, like, one, I'm not sure it'll happen, but two, I'm not sure it's the right fit. Like, either Ron and Mayhew are full of it and they don't actually want to run all the time, or there's just, again, no plan that you say you want to run it all the time, and then you're going to hire somebody from the Andy Reid tree. And maybe it's different with Bieniemy because he's a former running backs coach. That was his path. But, like, you can't look at the Chiefs, which is a dynamic offense and has Mahomes. And Andy has always had a good run game, but it's always been pass-first offenses. And they're smart about getting the ball to dynamic running backs in space, which, the analytics folks will argue is the same thing as running the ball. It just, to me, again, shows a lack of a cohesive plan if all of a sudden this dude is the front runner.
I mean, does that surprise you? Like,
no.
We've had 4 years of Ron's, kind of S-shaped path to success that kind of changes on a whim when, in every offseason. It seems kind of right on brand for what this coaching staff has done. And regardless of whether
is that S-shaped like the curve of the letter, or like what the edited version of S?
I was wondering the same thing.
Read into it what you will.
The Rorschach test.
However you want to take that, you can take that.
Yeah.
But the point being that, kind of regardless of what Ron and Marty said at the podium, neither of the two of them are your offensive mind on this coaching staff. And so I want them to bring in a dynamic play caller, and they can talk about wanting to run the ball all they want. At the end of the day, they pretty much let Scott Turner, for the most part of his tenure here, do what he wanted to do and call games the way that he wanted to, even though that seemed like a flawed, plan. And I think whoever comes in next is going to have that leeway, is going to have that runway to call a game how they want to call it. And to me, I like the idea of bringing in somebody who has a little wiggle to him, isn't 3 yards in a cloud of dust on first and second down and hope for a third down conversion pass. I mean, we all know that that's not a sustainable way to win in the NFL these days. You can't win trying to run the ball 2/3 of the time.
Yeah, I hear your trepidation, JP, about the lack of plan, but sort of what Mitch was saying, or maybe he wasn't saying this and I'm saying this, but like, who cares if the plan doesn't match up with getting Eric Bieniemy? Because in the end, you still get Eric Bieniemy, which I think would all be a better hire than we suspected. But yes, if they do want to actually run the ball, then why isn't Greg Roman coming in? Why aren't they doing a second interview with Charles London and Eric Studesville, guys who are either former running backs or come from Atlanta where they ran the ball a ton? So it's a bit disturbing that they might just be saying one thing and then trying to do another. But still, if it concludes with Bieniemy leaving Kansas City, coming here and trying his best to expand his career and make this offense a little more explosive, a little more creative, then that would be the bigger win than Ron once again doubling back on something he said. As long as Ron then lets Bieniemy do what he wants to do, as opposed to cramming handoffs to Brian Robinson and Jonathan Williams down his throat.
All right, 100 chips, and it's just Bieniemy or the field. So you don't have to pick somebody specific. Chances Eric Bieniemy is the Commander's new OC.
I'll go 25 chips, yes. 75, no. JP, I think the most prescient thing that's been said on this podcast in the past 15 minutes was we wanted Matt Stafford and we ended up with. We wanted Russ Wilson, we ended up with. We wanted Eric Bieniemy, we ended up with. I am fearful that that's the real game that's being played here, but just floating that idea out there excites me. I would like to have Bieniemy come, but I am more fearful that he's a name that's being floated to appease folks.
Yeah, perhaps Andy Reid puts in a really good word for Ron and convinces Eric that this is the best place to go to be under Ron. But I'm at 15 chips. Bieniemy actually comes here 85. It's somebody else, with the majority of those still on the Zampese section of the chips table.
It's funny. I think I might be higher than both of you guys. What were you?
Well, how could they do that? Could they offer him just a ton of money, or do you think it's the Ron and Andy relationship? Why are you higher than us?
The Ron and Andy relationship thing, I think, it's certainly a factor. But keep in mind, John Harbaugh was on those Eagles staffs too. Like,
yeah,
Andy got relationships with a lot of people, so I almost think we might be overestimating that. But like, I wonder a little bit if this isn't some musical chairs and there's not a lot of seats left for Bieniemy, and Washington is one of them. Like, if the Ravens are keeping Lamar, and forgive me, I've been out of pocket. Like, I don't even know if the Ravens have really been conducting interviews or anything yet. And I think Bieniemy still wants to be a head coach. I don't know, man. I go back and forth. The biggest question to me is, like, would Bieniemy want this job unless there were no other jobs available? If I'm Eric, I would kind of think this is the last spot I want to land in. You got no line. You got to rebuild a line. You got a quarterback that's intriguing, but you know nothing about. And what looks like a lame duck coaching staff with an ownership change coming. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, and some might look at that lame duck staff as like Eric can come here and step in and maybe be the next head coach. But as we saw with Wilkes in Carolina, as we see all the time, Bisaccia in Las Vegas, interim coaches or guys who step in for a fired coach rarely stick as the real guy. So that's probably not a great selling point in Washington's favor.
The other thing you can say for Washington is that the offense is pretty much
like 35. Sorry.
35?
35.
The offense is pretty much a blank canvas. There's no offensive identity. Like you said, you don't really know what the head coach, you don't really know what the quarterback is.
But like, hold on. You say that, but the head coach and the football czar of operations says he wants a running identity. So, like, you could say that, but if Ron is saying that, then there is an identity. Now, maybe he doesn't mean it, but he sure as hell's saying it.
2 years ago, they didn't want it. 2 years ago, they didn't want a quarterback. They wanted to build up the team around and then drop the quarterback in. And then all of a sudden they go off the rails and trade, 2 third-rounders for Carson Wentz. Like, what is being said year by year by Ron changes. And it changes from the beginning of the season to the end of the season, and then changes from the end of the season to the beginning of training camp, and then changes again from training camp to the beginning of the season.
I agree with you, and I agree about the S curve in all of its meanings. But like Ron said, we're just going to build up the team and then just try to drop a quarterback in. That was the Fitz year. Going into last offseason, Ron said quarterback's the number one priority. We got to do everything possible to fix it. Now, did they land on the wrong fix? Of course, in Wentz. But like that at least was consistent. Now, we'll see if this run game thing is consistent, but he did just say it, and the offseason hasn't started yet for it to be proved irrelevant.
Also worth mentioning, I don't think we recorded since Anthony Lynn will also potentially interview here. I think he falls for me above the Shermers and the Zampeses, but still below the Bienemies and the Thomas Browns. He's a middling candidate in my view.
I like Lynn. I'd be quite intrigued by that. I think, I mean, you say it about Andy. I think anybody close to Kyle offense for a year gets my interest piqued.
Yeah.
But regardless and it's an if, but if Lynn and if Bieniemy interview, all of a sudden this pool of candidates has gotten much better.
Yep. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I totally agree.